We're now going to be hearing from a leading voice on the health impacts of climate change, someone who has sounded the alarm more clearly and more urgently than most. Please welcome, joining us virtually, Professor Hugh Montgomery, founding co-chair of the Lancet Countdown on Climate Change and Health. Professor Montgomery is a renowned researcher. He is an advocate who has long been at the forefront of connecting climate science with human health. He has dedicated much of his career to warning the world about the health consequences of our inaction on climate change. So without further ado, Professor Montgomery.
Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. Let me just share my screen, and then I'll take you through the situation in which we find ourselves. Good. So I am indeed a doctor in London. I've worked in climate change now for 27 years, and I co-chair the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. And it's in that capacity I speak with you today to talk about the threats to human health, but actually to reframe that, because I'm no longer remotely concerned about the impact of climate change on health. I'm interested in the impacts on our survival as individuals, for our children, and for our species. And we start, of course, from a very bad situation. This is the Living Planet report, and this is the latest version in 2024. And before climate change has even had any great impact on our biosphere, it points out that since I was 8 years old, and I'm 62 now, we've lost 3/4 of our wildlife populations. 3/4. We know that in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have lost 95%. 95% of all vertebrate numbers there. Even 15 years ago, the United Nations Environment Programme was warning us that 8 species an hour were becoming extinct, and that this was the greatest rate of extinction since the vanishing of the dinosaurs, by a factor of several thousandfold. So we are in the midst of a mass extinction event, the biggest and fastest the planet has ever seen, and we're causing it. And that's before climate change happens. And if we keep hacking away at the base of an unstable column upon which we stand, the human species itself is threatened. Now, on top of that comes the threat of climate change. And we don't seem to be taking any notice of the risk that we face. We have been warned of this countdown, the clock ticking, and we have done nothing. So the question for you today is, how long have we got before that clock reaches zero? What happens when that countdown ends? And are we actually seriously trying to defuse this bomb now, or are we just all talking about it? Well, it would seem to me that until now, we've only just been talking about it, because these are the cumulative emissions in red every year from 1865, with this rapid acceleration in the 1970s. Last year, we emitted 54.6 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent into our atmosphere, and that was up by nearly 1% on the previous year. So we talk a lot, but we're doing absolutely nothing to reduce emissions. We're still increasing them. And that means the atmospheric concentration of CO2 is rising, and it's also rising ever more steeply. Last year, they rose at the fastest ever recorded annual rate. And that is trapping energy, the equivalent of 8 Hiroshima bombs worth of energy a second, and quite possibly a great deal more than that. And that's what this looks like, happening every single second, day and night of our day. Not just trapping energy, but cooking the land. Land surface temperatures are now nearly 1.9 Celsius above pre-industrial. In Europe, they're approaching 2.5 Celsius above pre-industrial. And in the Arctic, they've already pumped through 3 Celsius and a lot more in the northern Arctic. We're heating our oceans, adding 300 zetajoules to the oceans only last year. How much is that? It's enough to take 1 trillion Olympic swimming pools from freezing point and boil them. It's melting our seas, our sea ice. This is the last 1,500 years, and look what we've done in just the last 50 years to our right. And remember, none of this is going to stop, even if we cease emissions today. Arctic sea ice this year is the lowest ever recorded. We're also melting land ice, also at an ever increasing rate. And if we melt ice into the seas and we thermally expand them, sea levels rise, and they are. And that rate is also going up. It's now a centimetre every 2 years and rapidly accelerating. And if you add energy to atmosphere, you get weather, and the more energy you add, the more extreme weather events you get. And yes, here are just a few examples from 2023, the fires in Canada, with these pictures as the smoke hit New York. Valencia in Spain, where so many died with the flash flooding of last November. And of course, these pictures from space of Los Angeles ablaze only earlier this year. But we're all experiencing these in Britain and all around the world. But on top of that, we're seeing the economic impacts. Economies are collapsing. Lots of reports, these are just a few. We're now losing to extreme weather events directly attributable to climate change. $4,500 to the world economy a second. Last year, the United States alone lost nearly $1 trillion, $800 billion due to such events. And things are accelerating. Temperatures leapt last year, and these are not the impacts of the El Nino-La Nina cycle. These are impacts of changes in surface albedo, as we will currently see. Driven in part by positive feedback loops too. So methane, 83 times as powerful a greenhouse gas as is carbon dioxide in its first 20 years, is being added not just from methane being natural gas that we release from drilling it, but from frozen methane clathrates in carbonate rocks, frozen hydrates in tundra, and fermenting wetlands. The fires we are causing releases carbon monoxide that reduces methane breakdown, extending the methanic half-life, as does the destruction of trees, the surface of which would normally destroy methane. The net result, whilst methane had plateaued as a concentration by 2015, it is now also accelerating at an ever faster rate, trapping more and more heat around our planet. On top of that, the fires are releasing carbon dioxide. The fires in Canada in 2023 adding 6% to global greenhouse gas emissions just on their own. The heating of the oceans injects water vapour high into the atmosphere, where it acts as a greenhouse gas. The major rainforests of the world are now net emitters of CO2 as they catch fire. And the Arctic tundra has now shifted from storing carbon to becoming a carbon dioxide source. We've also found that we've lost reflection from snow and ice back into space, and from clouds, the so-called surface albedo effect, and that is collapsing. That's looking in the rear view mirror. That's where we are now, with such grave inaction. If we look ahead, things are not going to get better. They are going to be dramatically worse, unless we do start taking the action that no one has yet taken. Why? Because when we look at the representative concentration pathways driving heating, you'll see that the addition of those greenhouse gases, the positive feedback loops and the loss of albedo means that we've now moved to this pathway here. We're about to punch vertically through RCP 8.5. Is that bad? Yes, it is, because that would take us to 4.5 Celsius temperature rise, not 1.5. And we're going through this vertically at the moment. It could be that we go much higher than that temperature, and that would be catastrophic for us all. Indeed, this paper only came out this week, showing from release of banking data that the banks are now already expecting the temperature to rise by 3 Celsius. And as I pointed out to you, it's likely to be more. So we are not defusing this bomb at all. We are just talking. And what happens then, looking forward, when we reach zero? Well, the Lancet Countdown did try to look at the human health impacts, and it's looked at these: the pollen allergenicity, ground level ozone, heat waves, extreme weather events, sea level rise, algal blooms, and their impacts together on respiratory disease and cardiovascular disease. Through fires, drought, physical work reductions and flooding, loss of crops, through chemical poisoning, through bacterial disease, vector-borne disease. But in fact, I don't think these things matter terribly much anymore, because the big impacts will be the social ones. The ecosystem collapse that will be driven by worsening climate change. And I remind you, we've already lost 73% of the vertebrate populations on the planet. The starvation, the mass migration, and the war, which will be coming to us all very soon. Well, let's look at what is likely to be happening. If we even transiently overshoot around 1.7 to 2.3 Celsius, we get abrupt collapse of Arctic ice sheets. Let me point out to you that we're already at more than 3 Celsius in the Arctic now. We know that we will drive a significant slowing, if not collapse, of the Atlantic Meridional overturn circulation, upon which our weather depends, within the next 20 to 30 years. It may not collapse completely, but it will certainly slow if it does not collapse very dramatically with catastrophic consequences. Such consequences leading to multi-meter sea level rise within the lifetimes of some of you listening to this today, and certainly of our children. My son is 19. Because remember, the last time we breached 420 parts per million, sea levels were 58 meters higher than they are now. And you might have noticed that we're already at 427 parts per million now. The warning is coming from others. This paper only from last week, coming from the biggest food producers, manufacturers and retailers. Yield, quality and predictability of supply of food is not something we'll be able to rely on in coming years. Even now, the food supply upon which we depend cannot be relied upon. And the economists have warned us, this paper last year, that we now are committed to a loss of 20% of the global economy, 38 trillion a year. That's the end of education, it's the end of health services, and it's the end of food for many billions. But it's probably worse than that too. This paper only just out, showing that the economic metric models assumed that weather was only impacting single countries, when in fact, if you factor in the effects of extreme weather on other countries affecting those economies, damage to world GDP rises to at least 40%, not 20%. And in fact, this paper from the Institute of Actuaries saying that we're looking at 50% loss with these huge impacts on mass mortality, that's billions dying, billions being displaced or migrating, severe economic impacts, and wars. Indeed, they warn, and I'm quoting directly, our economy may not exist at all if we do not mitigate climate change. We were warned in 2020 that even static temperature changes will lead to the displacement or death of nearly 3 billion people within the next few decades. We know that if we breach these sorts of temperatures of 3 or 4 degrees, we trigger a Permian-level mass extinction. Remember that Permian killed 96% of all life on Earth. And read what the scientists last year said in their annual State of the Climate report. We're on the brink of an irreversible climate disaster. Much of the very fabric of life on Earth is imperiled, and this is a global emergency beyond any doubt. Indeed, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned us 3 years ago now. Any further delay in concerted global action means we miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future, one in which I might survive, and I'm 62, or my son, who is 19. And as the faculty of actuaries say, we've left it too late to tackle climate change incrementally. We now have to make transformational change, because it's no point in pointing at the clock and shouting and waiting for it to go off. Why don't we defuse that bomb rather than trying to cope with the billions of deaths that will result when it detonates? It's important that we do focus on adaptation to some degree, because we are baked in with impacts upon our health and our survival. But this cannot be at the detriment of massively driving down emissions now, because there is no point in focusing on palliation of disease when we should be focusing on cure. We cannot wait for the patient to be dying and try to give them pain relief at the same time. Why offer palliation when we can prevent the disease? So there is a health argument for urgency of climate action, and we must all, you and I, make that case to our government ministers, our companies, the people controlling finance. But more than that, we should be making the survival argument. And we should take every opportunity to speak about this and to persuade leaders that more must be done today if you and I wish to live. And for all of you here today, we must advocate for urgent action to cease greenhouse gas emissions in order to survive. We cannot be pigeonholed into the health voice where all we talk about is adapting healthcare systems to what's coming down the line, because that would be dishonest of us. We must fight for the lives of all of those we know and love, and not just for future generations, but for those of us alive today. By all means, we can treat the symptoms, but we must also treat the disease and do the right thing. Because to survive, we must cure the disease and do that right thing in driving emissions down. Because if we do not act and we know the data, then we, you and I, are complicit. So I wish you well for the conference ahead, and I empower you, please shout loudly and drive for the change that has been so badly lacking over the last 2 decades. Thank you.